Hello and welcome to another week of the War Report. We're back with another episode. Actually, less than a week because, again, all hell has broken loose in Syria and things have moved rapidly with the involvement of Turkey, with the seemingly rapid withdrawal of the U.S., the complete withdrawal of French forces, and of course the new deal between the Kurds and the Syrian government, or more appropriately, the SDF, quote unquote, in the Syrian government, and how almost overnight, I'll actually pull up that map right now, how all the red that is gained on the map, and I think we may be looking at every inch may be retaken, to bring back an old favorite quote.
Assad was right again.
He always is.
it's and the curse still stands. It's really just amazing. Last week we were speculating what might happen. My own thoughts were that although Russia wasn't happy about it, based on what news reports I gathered, and that goes as well for Syria, that this new safety zone would be introduced along the border between Syria and Turkey, and that would be that. And the Kurds would lose a substantial amount of power. However, they've still lost this power, but they've asked at great concessions. They've asked Russia and Syria to for protection, essentially. And so the dream of Western Kurdistan is essentially over, which really shouldn't have been anyways. And I think it's had kind of a rippling effect. There was an article in Poland today where it was written, what's the possibility that America would abandon us as well, or another European ally? So they're kind of getting the message, and you can see how mainstream media kind of covers up for this. There was an article today about how Lithuania is so relieved that there's the NATO buildup, which is 70% of NATO is U.S. forces within the country. So I think this is going to have an enormous effect, and I think that Russia and Turkey can work out whatever differences they have with regards to the Kurds. I think they're both going to be level-headed about this. They have too much invested, and there's too much to gain from cooperation going forward. Now, with the Americans out of the way, negotiations are going to be far, far easier. And the only thing that's a potential hazard, of course, is that what if war nonetheless breaks out between these three partners? What if Russia is wedged between Syria and Turkey? Because Russia's vision for Syria was a federation, and Assad's vision was to more or less bring back a retooled Syria that would not have this federation aspect to it, but would have more of the the original integrity and force that it had prior to the war in 2011. So I think that's going to be the challenge. Is Russia negotiating between Turkey and Syria?
Not to mention Iran and Israel.
Yes, of course. Yeah, but I yes, of course. I think the primary players that's where I think the main problem will arise out of.
Oh yeah, because if Turkey goes full force into Syria, which I doubt they will, at that point the Iranians are not holding back. Which at that point Israel will not hold back, if they can form a government. That is, I mean, look, it may be a little while before we get a response, but by God, will we get an Israeli response, whether it's from Netanyahu or Gantz?
Right, and they're still quiet nearly a week later, and we're not hearing from them. Maybe they don't want people to associate their. I think they're intentionally, of course, being quiet in order not to draw attention to their alliance with the Kurds. And the Kurds are getting BTFO'd right now, so I mean it's over for them. Uh, that has to make Turkey happy to some degree. Um, one could argue that some of Turkey's concerns have been alleviated by this, and that, in some peculiar way, this operation is proving to be a really great way of getting rid of jihadis. Because Erdogan has sent these jihadis, these freedom fighters, to the front lines, and they're the ones who are going to be facing the fire. He even expressed that he didn't care if Assad took Manjib. He wasn't interested in it anyways. So the rhetoric is getting to be very interesting. Um, Maybe some of these fighters have already been lured out of Idlib and are headed towards there. I don't know. There's so many various groups there uh, that it's hard to tell.
Yeah,
Uh,
I,
you
I
know,
think I think at least the South Front report said that the National Syrian Army, which is the Turkish proxy force assisting in the invasion, they have had 6 killed and 12 wounded so far, with only two official Turkish military personnel injured so far. So
right,
just keep that in mind. The Kurds haven't
right.
fared well
So
in terms of casualties, and I don't think the proper Syrian army has taken any casualties yet.
yeah, yeah. I don't think any of these players are interested in this thing getting any hotter than it is. That's no guarantee that it won't. But I do think they want a process as peaceful as possible that's going to resolve these issues, because of course Erdogan does have a problem with 3.6 million Syrian refugees in his country, and the West can put the screws on him. They can abandon Turkey as well, and have a very, very negative impact. Um, and at that point, he very well may release them. Um, we shouldn't suspect that all the jihadis were in these Kurdish held territories, but there's none in the camps whatsoever. That's extremely naive. Um, so, like I say, I think the future is better for all these partners if they can if they can cooperate, if they can make some concessions. Um, Otherwise, if this war continues to fester, let's say for another 2, 3, 4 more years, it's going to basically weaken all of them. Uh, Erdogan will lose support. Putin will lose support. The Russian public isn't as enthusiastic as they were in 2015. So I think all of them need some kind of resolution.
Yeah, Russia's in a particularly precarious situation because in 2015, especially after the one Russian jet, actual Russian civilian airliner got downed over Egypt by ISIS, the Russian people were very supportive of the campaign. And then, of course, they said, oh, we're protecting the local Christian population, which garnered a little bit more support. But after the stalling in Idlib, I would say around summer 2018, people started to really question what are they doing there. After the more recent
Yeah.
successes in Idlib over this summer, they they were more supportive of it, thinking there was going to be a quick resolution. And now they're getting back down to one of those points where it's like, again, what are we doing here? Why are we wasting all this time and money? Why are our troops getting attacked in this country? I thought this was supposed to be a quick resolution. And as we discussed last week, if there is a resolution in Idlib that sacrifices some of northeastern Syria, I think that'll be a big boost, especially for the Russians. Maybe not so much for the Syrian government in Iran, but for Russia definitely. And a couple other things I gotta say is you have to love how the same people who are crying about Turkey just destroying the Kurds, invading and destroying northern Syria, are doing so with the same groups that they called moderate rebels 5 years ago and said that we must arm so they can fight against the tyranny of Assad and ISIS and Iran, and that we must help them and support them now. They're siding with the evil Turkish invaders, the evil Erdogan. And
Yeah,
You
isn't
mentioned,
that hilarious?
yes, yes.
Isn't that hilarious? There were freedom fighters in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Like for years, they were the freedom fighters. But apparently, you can hire them to go kill Kurds if you want.
Well, you
Uh,
see, what happened was their name changed from the Free Syrian Army to the National Syrian Army. That's what happened.
right, and those guys they've both fought ISIS and Al Qaeda. They've also had members that switch sides. I mean, uh, compared to like our ideologies, all of these guys are batshit crazy.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
there's a contingency that wants to keep it all in Syria. There's a contingency that wants it in Iraq and Syria, and then there's a contingency that think they can take over the world with all of this. Those are pretty much your three
right,
camps of this.
right, right. Reminds me of that cartoon where um, ISIS and Al Qaeda they're on this field and this dismembered body, and the Al Qaeda figure has got this like yikes face. Like ISIS really went too far this time. We're formally separated.
Yeah.
You guys are on a whole. You guys are on a whole new level. Yeah. So and the Western elite world is in a panic. Um, they went from being in a panic to almost just morally dunked. You know, um, now that Russia has stepped in, they're at a loss for words.
Yeah. Well, just to bolster that point, I've been keeping up with the Democratic debates via live tweets again. Celine Bradley, check him out. He does great work. I actually get a lot of the information from the show from him. Tweets on a lot of things like European politics, all this kind of stuff. And I just been keeping up with his feed while we're doing this. And apparently, Amy Klobuchar is up there on the debate stage saying, "We must defend the Kurds. Look how Trump has betrayed our allies." So it is a bipartisan squawking fest, if you will.
Right. And even some Americans were shelled as well. The French have moved out. Uh, so the battlefield has changed dramatically in Syria. The stakes have changed. Well, some of them have. It's going to be really interesting to see, on a moral and psychological level, how America and the West is going to deal with this. The liberal pundits are just absolutely wrecked.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it was Maddow doing her usual bit and talking about how, oh, the Kurds, they've been betrayed, and this is somehow mastermind by evil Vladov Putler, and he's the big winner of the day. Which is funny, she's right, but for the wrong reasons.
The Dems are right. Listen, guys. Putin really did get Trump elected.
Well, you have to remember that there's a theory out there that goes something. I heard this today that Trump
Yes.
was anointed by God to bring down the American empire.
Putinism is literally the fastest growing ideology in the West right now.
Not Putinism, just Putin.
Just Putin, yeah. Yeah, Ben Shapiro is wrecked. They're all wrecked. They don't know what to do.
I mean, Ben Shapiro's Fed posting now. I mean, I know it's a completely unrelated topic, but that's how far he's been pushed.
Mhm. Yeah. So, like I say, so I think the main struggle is going to be between Russia negotiating with Syria about what future Syria is going to look like, what is attainable. The fact is, there isn't any other player that's willing to stick its neck out as much as Russia is in order to protect Syria.
I agree, but I
Of
think it'll
course,
go
Russia
further.
has its own interests there. I'm not saying they don't, but the fact of the matter is, there's no one else more invested
Oh,
or
absolutely.
more capable.
But I think it will go a bit further in terms of a sort of impasse between Russia and Syria. I think there'll also be an impasse between Russia and Iran because I have an inclination that Russia, in order to try to keep the peace as much as you can in the Middle East, will try to appease Israeli demands on getting Iranian and Iranian-backed forces at least pushed back to a certain point in Syria, so that may create friction between those two as well.
Yeah, that's a possibility, and it's been an ongoing series of negotiations. Uh, so, that will continue. Of course, the Iranians haven't left, and I'm actually glad they haven't left. They have their own interests there as well. Um, and Israel, again, is very quiet. They haven't managed to really gain anything. Uh, I think Israel feels even more betrayed, and maybe that's why they're so quiet.
Yeah, and I also do have to say it probably has to do with their incoherence in forming government and the fact that we've discussed this before. I think I actually brought this up last week or the week before that Israel put their eggs all in one basket, assuming that regime change was going to happen in early 2018, and it didn't play out. That's why they were so aggressive in the week leading up to when we actually bombed them in 2018, and that's why they've been so aggressive ever since. I mean, they've calmed down since, but people say this is the most tense it's been between the two countries since the 1973 war and the flare-ups in 1974. But I think it is a combination of the fact that they're fuming, they also don't have a coherent government, and they also don't want to overplay their hand more than they already have, especially with Netanyahu still holding the seat in power, but it's a very high possibility that he may not be there in the coming months.
Right, and you have to wonder, like, um, who is going to bring America back into Syria? I don't even think Israel can, and I think Israel, and that's the only country that I think could. I don't think America is going to go back in if if things continue to get violent with Turkey. I also think that this is a clever strategy to not only rid America of the situation that they were in, but hopefully, just from the momentum of this war, that the conflict takes on a new face. The one I speculated earlier, that between Russia and Turkey. Now, it's possible, but it's very remote, that if anything should happen between Russia and Turkey vis-a-vis Syria, that of course, the West will immediately turn face and support Turkey. I have no doubt about that. However, that said, we should keep in mind that the tactical weapons from Turkey that were at Incirlik, they have been removed. So I think there's a slow process going on of Turkey eventually leaving NATO, I think. This whole thing may be, the watershed moment that we realize that is what's happening. That could be the backstory to all of this.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And also, you brought up the West response, the United States response. It's been a bit twofold. What we have is the Congress is fuming. They passed an overwhelming sanctions bill to the point where even Trump's going to have to sign. Even if he vetoed it, it would have the 2/3 majority. But he simultaneously sent Mike Pence over to the country, and Mike Pence will be meeting with Erdogan in, I believe, Thursday. Now, you might think, okay, yeah, business as usual. He sends one of his second in commands to go meet with him. But I think it's a bit more significant that he sent Mike Pence as opposed to Pompeo. Now, I know Pompeo has sounded more sane as of late with John Bolton out. He's tempered himself a bit on some of these situations. But he's still hawkish, all things considered, and probably currently the most hawkish member of the administration. Now, Pence, ideologically, is very hawkish, very much sympathetic with the neoconservatives, but he is also noted to be, if you're to believe the inside reports of the White House, a diehard Trump loyalist who will follow his boss's commands to hell and back. So there may be a bit more significance as to why he sent Pence as opposed to Pompeo.
Oh, I don't think he can afford to send Pompeo.
Oh, nah, I don't think so either.
Yeah, no. Pompeo's. I mean, he's an idiot, barely better than Bolton. Also, you could probably tell just by using North Korea as an example that when Kim Jong Un destroyed some of these nuclear missile facilities and so on. Nothing was given in return. So it wasn't a surprise that about 6, 7 months later, he's off in Russia in Vladivostok meeting with Putin. Um, because the vision that America has for its interest into the future are expectations that simply cannot be met. They cannot be met anymore. Um, America's leadership, I think, is over. It's or it's vastly different than it was. Um, I also think that the world itself isn't looking to America for leadership. So the vision is based on an idea of the world that's about anywhere from 10 to 30 years back, and I think the same applies here. So it'll be interesting to sort of see where America is going to go after leaving Syria. What other theater will they be interested in going into? So, I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be Afghanistan. I don't know if that's going to be the Pacific. It's hard to tell right now. I don't know if they still have any plans for Venezuela.
Oh yeah, I was just about to bring that up, but you also make a point to get in the obligatory now weekly reference to it. Something Colonel Douglas McGregor said last night. He was on one of these Fox News shows. I can't remember. I think it was Lou Dobbs, which it's surprising. He's actually making his way to more and more Fox shows besides Tucker Carlson, which actually makes me a little bit hopeful for the future of conservative media. Not by much, but just ever so slightly. And he was saying that, look, the world does not want American leadership, and Americans do not want to bear the burden of providing that leadership. It's a mutual disinterest in this case.
Yes, I think that's an excellent point. I think the buildup, especially since Ron Paul's first bid for presidency, there's been a growing a conservative consensus to get out of these wars. And the ironic thing is that there's been a switch, and there's been a left-wing support for these wars. I also think part of the reason that the liberal class in the West is so shocked by this is, I think, in some ways they can surmise that America no longer being a leader will also have probably economic consequences as well. And I think they absolutely are aware. They know that a liberal order relies on prosperity. And obligatorily it relies on peace, but it also relies on dominance.
It relies on the illusion of peace, I would say further.
Yeah, yeah. So if that dominance isn't there, then there's a very strong likelihood also that there's going to be economic consequences. And if there's economic consequences in the long run, I'm projecting 10, 20 years, gradually going in a certain direction, then their world is in danger. And I think that's part of it. So I think, they're seeing symbolically America being removed from the position of first, or the exceptional country, or the leader of the world. And I think that's why they're so devastated by this. The Kurd story is just the initial. It's just the surface of the subject.
Oh yeah, it's a microcosm into the failures of the past decade of the to say Obama era. I mean, you had Libya, which was a complete disaster. You had his, I guess you'd call it inaction in Syria in a sense, where, or you could say like his half-hearted action, where he didn't get the approval to pull in a Libya in Syria, so he didn't get to do
Right.
that, which led to the moderate rebels, which led to the supporting the Kurdish groups, of course, which led to ISIS, which was, ironically enough, in the end, probably one of the best things to happen to Russia in terms of their ability to project powers since then the Cold War. And
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean,
honestly,
Russia could have stayed
try
out of it.
explaining this to somebody in 1991. Just
No, no. Yeah, Russia's come back from just nowhere, from oblivion.
yeah, and actually,
It,
with that, beyond the Syria topic, I think we'll probably tack this on at the end of the show. I wanted to get a little bit into China, especially with their relation to with Russia and resurging powers. But to continue on the topic, I mean, look, I think Erdogan, funny enough, I think he's made his gains. I think he's probably gotten himself a few bargaining chips for the next Sochi summit, if you will, or wherever they have it, whether that be in Tehran or somewhere in Turkey. I know they've done it in Ankara before. They've done it in Constantinople or Istanbul, is known as the common man's tongue. Uh, but next meeting, the next trilateral meeting, I think Erdogan will have a bit more bargaining chips. Now, at what cost that is to him, I say that's yet to be determined. So, I mean, like I said, there's been 2 wounded Turkish soldiers, but the proxies have taken quite a beating for only the past couple days.
right, and just a few more things about Syria, and that is there was an emergency meeting convened in Cairo of the Arab League. And if we remember, in 2011, Syria was kicked out. They announced recently that at the meeting in Cairo that that was a mistake, and Syria is formally re-invited in. Um, the Arab world is at the moment not happy with Turkey, and that will give Syria and Russia leverage with regards to Turkey, and also Putin apparently has made a deal with Saudi Arabia, a $2 billion deal in investment. So, oh, that boy is busy. He's all over the place.
No, no, he is forging that big tent coalition against liberalism.
Yes, that's right.
Everyone from the
He's
ultra
literally,
Zionists to the Islamists to the European Christian nationalists to the
yeah,
Chinese communists, they will be united under one banner of illiberalism. And I dare say it's
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's hilarious to watch, isn't it? I can't believe it. Like, a lot of the speculation and fears that you saw, you know, in 2015, 16, especially after Trump got elected. I gotta say that the Dems were right. Maybe Putin did get Trump elected.
Yeah, I mean, at this rate, I know we've been very harsh on Trump. I know, and look, there's been reason to be. He has failed to live to a lot of things, especially in domestic policy. I'd say my biggest gripe with him is foreign policy's calmed down on to the point where this Syria move actually makes up for a lot of what he's done wrong. But it
Yeah,
goes back to the immigration issue, which I could go into all day. We've discussed it even on the show, which is something I would not have expected to do when I first started this show. But whatever. That points inside to the point where, like, yeah, when E. Michael Jones says, yeah, Trump may have been anointed by God to end this empire, it's like, is that too far fetched? I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but it's like, it's definitely one of the less crazy things I've heard in this current political paradigm.
I know. I know. It really is something. Um, Also, like I said, there's going to be a ripple effect of other small allies of the United States that are, worried that America might just abandon them as well. That something very fundamental is happening, and we may see new alliances and new negotiations. We also may see new conflicts. I think there's, definitely trepidation in Poland with that article, suggesting that America could abandon us as well,
Yeah,
and
I saw
other
some of
European
the
allies.
Baltic
So
states were also in quite the tizzy about this.
yeah, yeah. So it's only going to get more interesting going forward. I've heard other theories about how China ties into this, about their One Belt, One Road initiative, and there's some countries that want to block it, and Russia might be one of those countries. But honestly, I don't entertain these ideas all that much because they often originate from people who um, they'll talk all day about how Russia and China are not really that aligned. Like as if we don't ourselves have a grain of salt when it comes to Russia and China,
Yeah,
but they'll
I would say,
exaggerate.
yeah, I would say I somewhat subscribe to that theory, but I think it's irrelevant to even discuss that with the current level of American global power. Look, maybe give it a decade or so when American global power actually does decrease. That may be a discussion worth having, but right now, as we sit here in late
Yeah,
2019, I don't think that's a discussion worth having. I think it's a bit premature.
right. And often these things are said in order to alleviate fears of the loss of American hegemonic power. That's why they're said in the first place, not because they're absolutely provable observations.
Yeah, look, I mean, we have our biases. We're very open about it. You could probably tell just by listening to this where we stand on the Syrian conflict, where we stand on Russia's role in the world. But we don't paint our
Yeah.
show as objective fact telling. You come here to listen to our opinions, and if you like them, great. If you don't, okay, stick around if you want. Post the nasty comments. Hell, come on the show. We'll actually have a discussion with you if you really want to talk about it that bad. We don't present ourselves like the mainstream media, like even some of these alternative media outlets that were these objective fact tellers that's going to tell you the truth about the world. No, we give our outlook about the world just to put more perspectives out there.
Right. Not like this is what government is not telling.
Oh boy,
We're not libertarians. So.
I mean, maybe from an acceleration standpoint, but I digress.
Yeah, yeah, me too. Okay, when you put it that way.
Yeah, but I do think it's amazing. I know much hasn't changed on this front, but you can still see that Syria has taken more and more oil fields, but the Kurds control the most of the oil fields. But I'm sure part of
Mhm.
this deal has to do with fuel supplies, and I'm also pretty sure, like I would be
Yeah.
shocked if it didn't, that even just temporarily, they have to be willing to allow the Syrian people, the Syrian military, to use their fuel if they want any hopes of repelling this invasion. I mean, what, you gonna ship it in from Iran, cause more trouble in the Gulf, which is all but died down at this point, besides the one Iranian tanker which blew up over the weekend and which led to the deployment of American troops in Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth, right after Trump announced his withdrawal. Which, again, it's to be expected. It's nothing I'm gonna like scream my head off over, but I'm not happy about it. Or are they going to ship it in from Russia when tensions between Russia and Turkey are growing through the Bosphorus? Or are they going to try to fly it in? I mean, there's I look. I'm not an expert in oil transportation, but it's usually not flown, and I can only imagine why. Uh, so
Yeah.
I can't see any way that if the Kurds are genuinely willing to cooperate, I think they got to be willing to at least temporarily give up some of the oil.
I don't even think it's going to be temporary. I think it's over.
Yeah,
I think it's over.
I think it's over for the Kurds. I
Uh,
think the best they're going to get is the Russian proposal of a federal system where they have a degree of autonomy, similar to a system in Iraq where they can LARP as their own autonomous state, but at any point they could be shut down like that. Like we did see in Iraq, actually in 2017, during the other big flare for Kurdish independence, the Iraqi army pretty much shut that down.
right. And also, I mean, if they so choose, I mean, the Iraqi border is right there. This is really about the Kurds overextending their hand. Um, and let's face it, they could never have defeated ISIS as well as they did without first having America to back them, and without ISIS preoccupied fighting Syrians for at least 7 years.
Yeah, I mean Syrians
Um,
and Iraqis
it's
and the
it,
Iranian-backed groups in Iraq. So yeah, the the Islamic State really overplayed its hand.
yeah,
Which you could say leads me to believe that maybe a degree of controlled opposition, maybe not entirely, but I don't know. You figure with that many resources, with that much oil, with that many arms, and these all of a sudden new Toyota trucks, that they should still control a good chunk of at least Iraq or Syria today, at least in one of the countries. But considering the fact, as we can see on this map right now, there's only these few little black dots in
Mhm.
eastern Syria. I mean, you could say that a lot of ISIS members redefected back
Yeah.
to the quote unquote moderate rebel groups as they defected before, and that they sort of go wherever the wind blows. But point being is, yeah, I mean, I could do an entire show on the mysteries of ISIS, but I mean, it, like last week, I'm still somewhat at a lost word. It's been a wild ride here in Syria, and honestly, I think what a lot of people are overlooking, we just touched on this last week, is Idlib. We need to keep an eye on Idlib, especially if those fuel reserves get opened up. If Syria gets control of that fuel again, I think we'll see a hell of a lot more action in Idlib.
Right. There is of course a danger that if Syrian troops are preoccupied with northern Syria and the Kurds and Turkey, that's going to give it a free hand. Um, so that is a concern, but in a way, the gains that have been made in Idlib gradually, but especially the last 3 weeks. I think Syria is confident that they can actually do this. They've had a lot of experience in this war. I don't think that they're making a mistake. In other words, I don't think they're overextending themselves.
Now, there is another topic I wanted to bring up. I'll probably throw in a few other topics and tack on some of the China and Poland stuff just to get the show through because we actually got through a lot of this serious stuff faster than I expected. As for the U.S. presence in Syria, we have our nuclear weapons there. We have mostly air personnel there, mostly Air Force personnel. I mean, seeing the way things are going, I know Trump has been sort of actually the softer one on this compared to Congress, and how Congress is passing this resolution saying, oh, we must stay in Syria, which holds no water. Congress doesn't have that authority, but again, we'll see how that plays out. But I can't see over the next few years Incirlik or the other air base we have there remaining in Turkey with the way current relations are going, with the way the region is going. I mean, I don't know where they're going to go. Possibly they could go somewhere in Europe. I know we have airfields in Greece. We have airfields in Eastern Europe, such as Bosnia. Could go, I mean, to Israel. We've been talking about that for years, opening a permanent base in Israel. They could go to back to Iraq, maybe one of the Gulf states. I mean, um, or hell, maybe at this point Georgia, with the way things are there. But yeah,
Yeah.
in terms of U.S.-Turkish relations, I can't see these troops that have been there for decades being able to stay there much longer. This may be like a something
Mhm.
that the neocons might bring up or something fear mongering, but what if Turkey does go full ape shit, pardon my language, and tries to seize the nukes for themselves and says we're a nuclear state now? And now I doubt they do that, but you have to consider all the possibilities here.
Right.
Or what if? I mean, we already have cases of them harassing Incirlik during the 2016 coup and several times afterwards. And I would say out of all the deployments in quote unquote allied countries, U.S. troops probably get harassed the most in Turkey.
Right. And, I mean, like some people, I think we're a minority, but I personally think that the coup attempt in Turkey was partly orchestrated or partly funded, or that there was American and Western involvement in that. That all that Erdogan managed to do was, you know, crack the code, as it were, and preempt the coup. In my opinion, I don't believe because the initial revolt started in Incirlik.
Oh yeah,
So my feeling was that especially the Pentagon, that they wanted to get rid of Erdogan. That they wanted a more compliant leader in order, to solve the Syria situation. Of course, the Pentagon and the CIA were at odds in Syria about who to fund. However, I think they were in agreement about having a, let's say, not quite a coup on the level of Ukraine, and definitely not a regime change. But they wanted Erdogan out,
Passing the
and
torch, if you will.
for obvious reasons, right? Because it wasn't shortly too long after that that he made his first attacks on ISIS after that, in a sense betraying them because he was buying oil from them, and he didn't have a problem with them running amok in Syria. No one did, really. So, yeah, what again is as clever as Erdogan is. I don't think he's impulsive. I don't think anything is going to happen
Yeah,
with
I don't think an impulsive man could have lasted in his
with
situation as long as he has, if that were really the case. And this is something we touched on in the
right.
early
Like
days of the
he
show.
could
That
do his
go on.
Yeah, I mean, I see him playing games with the threat of releasing refugees into Europe, but I can't fathom him doing that with nuclear weapons. That I think his own country, I think his country would turn on him if he did that. Because it's simply going too far, and he simply doesn't have the support anywhere to pull something like that off. Like these sanctions that are being placed against Turkey, these are mostly individuals. They're not entire sectors of industry, right? And we shouldn't forget that there's a 25 wine and cheese tax placed on Europe at the moment by the U.S. But then I still love that. I only drink beer. I don't drink wine, but our wine is just as good as the French. So, yeah. I will never get tired of that. I just love that. So, you know, these, I don't think the impact is going to be all that great. Russia managed within 3 years to turn the tide after sanctions were initially placed in 2014. Most of the sanctions are all against individuals, right? And Russia retaliated, which cost Europe over $100 billion in trade. And, so that sanctions war not only made things worse for Europe and the EU, but then fast forward 4 or 5 years, and America now has placed taxes on Europeans for wine and cheese. They're literally known for wine and cheese, especially France.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you actually, just put a bow on that point. Again, someone like Erdogan wouldn't have lasted that long if he were just impulsive and irrational. And
Yeah,
something we touched on in the beginning of this program, like some of the first few episodes, is the neoconservative worldview. Now, most of it, granted, is propaganda, but the people who buy into it, that the world outside of the West is just run by these irrational, murderous tyrants who have no regard
yeah,
for anything.
yeah.
That isn't the case. That I mean, every leader has to have at least some degree of support. I think once you lose support of 20% of the politically active population, that's when you're in trouble. That I think we almost got to that point in Venezuela, but I can't think of any point in recent history, maybe Mugabe, where it's actually gotten like that. I mean,
Mm.
everyone needs a base of support, even if it is amongst sort of the people who control the money, who control the guns. But the point stands that you have to have at least a degree of rationality, or someone more rational, someone better at this game than you, is going to take your place and put a bullet in the back of your head.
Right. I mean, even Kim Jong Un, when he fires these missiles, it's all show. I mean, he's not really this caricature that he's portrayed in the news that he's batshit crazy. He's going to do something crazy. We have to do something. We have to do something. It's all extremely well measured. Of course, people buy into it. All you have to do is literally go to Trump's Twitter feed. The comments. How could Erdogan do this? Reply. I mean, not a reply to Trump, but it'll be somebody posting. How could Erdogan do this? And someone will reply back. It's what dictators do.
Yeah,
Like that level of left of center boomer cringe. Honest to God, but this is a huge portion of the population, right? Like statecraft wouldn't form these kind of caricatures of leaders and societies unless they were that effective.
I mean, there's a reason it may not seem like it in the modern age that republicanism and democracy are not the norm. It is despotism, it is monarchy, it is autocracy, it is some form of oligarchy or theocracy because these types of governments actually command power. Republics, again,
Mhm.
democracies, they're based on the consent of the public. Not that these other governments aren't, but to a greater extent are based on the consent of the active participation of the public. Whereas these other ones are sort
Right.
of, we have the, other excuse to use our history. We have the power. We have the divine right. We'll protect you, which in some of these cases, they do have more legitimate reasons than not. I would say, I mean, and again, there's countries that never tasted democracy. And you want a good example is, oh, look at they said the Italians couldn't have democracy, and look, they have democracy today, which is why they've gone through 68 governments since the end of World War II, since the last time they had a dictator or some autocrat in power. Because before that it was Mussolini, then it was sort of an authoritarian parliamentary system where the monarch had power. But point being is, countries like even a lot of European countries are more comfortable under an authoritarian ruler or an autocratic leader than they are under this parliamentary democracy or this republicanism.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And part of that is because they have the I mean the oligarch is really like a pale stand-in for monarchy, and monarchy and its traditions uh, work on a kind of familial narrative, a kind of ethno narrative of the people, and so on.
Yeah.
And oligarchies are really a kind of empty version of that.
Oh yeah. I heard somebody a while ago say something that really resonated with me. They said people talk about how far we've come since the medieval era, how far we've come since even just a few hundred years ago. That oh look, we're free, we have our own agency, we can be hold our rulers accountable. Where this person made the point that under feudalism, under a form of government like that, where you knew who your lord, who your governor was. You went to church with them. They lived in your community. Every so often, every week, every month or so, they heard the concerns of the commoner, of the peasant. Now, as dismissive as they may be, you had them standing in the town actually listening to two yokels, if you will, debating over this chicken was on the property line, so it's mine. Tedious stuff like that. Whereas our ruling class now are, you can write your senator, you can write your governor, uh, but in most cases, it's just a nameless, faceless bureaucrat that is actually has power over you, and you can't see them. You don't know who they are. You can't hold them accountable. Even if you do vote out the bad politicians or find some other way to remove them from office, more often than not, the bureaucrats remain.
Hmm. Yeah, correct. And also, really, it's after the Industrial Revolution and just prior to that, monarchies were already adapting, and then later other forms of government that came that progressed after the monarchies simply have found ways to maintain power. And of course, I'm not being a libertarian about this, but with all the kind of power, literally power that the average citizen can have vis-a-vis the technologies that came forth out of the Industrial Revolution. Right? They've fundamentally changed society, and I would just say humanity as a whole has adapted, and there's a different hierarchy, and it works differently than what we're used to, and a lot of it simply reflects the world that we're in. And also that the populaces now are so absolutely enormous, and at the same time, travel and so on is so absolutely fast. But anyhow, I don't want to steer too off topic. But
Now, you did bring up the French earlier, and that did pivot me to. I wanted to bring this up actually earlier in the show, but I'm just getting around to it. That countries like Poland, like the Baltic states, like some of these Eastern European countries, are saying, "Oh, look, the U.S. is so unreliable. If they can't stand with the Kurds against Turkey, how will they ever stand with us?" I'm thinking, especially with Macron's recent moves,
mhm.
he's may pivot towards the Eastern European states. He may pivot towards Poland, towards the Baltics, saying, look, if the United States won't, we can enhance our defense cooperation. You can buy some arms from us. We how about we open some bases in your country? And I mean, we see Macron already making the moves, trying to become the um, regional hegemon over at least Europe. So I mean, I think he probably will take advantage of this. But if not, he's an absolute fool.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is an opportunity for France, and he may seize on that. Now, today there was, of course, the firefighters protest that took place. This went on for hours. His presidency is not a popular one. However, I think he's also, he's a very intelligent man nonetheless. And if he shows himself that he can be a leader, that he can be trusted, and so on, he can really project his power. And with America receding, someone in Europe will, and I think to some extent he thinks that he can, right? I can't help it, but I'm going to do this joke. I could see Macron basically saying to the Baltic states and Poland, I don't care if your gas is Russian as long as your cheese and wine are French. Essentially, essentially, this is how going to be his real politique.
Yeah, but
You know
yeah,
that.
by no means is
But
Macron a Russophile, but he's practical in his opposition to Russia. He realizes there's limits to it.
yeah, I agree. I agree. And Merkel is becoming less and less relevant.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I think in
she's
many ways Merkel has already left.
yeah, I mean Merkel is in her lame duck term. It's safe to say that she probably is ailing from some sort of illness brought on by age.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I mean we know that when Macron first came along, he was sort of picked to be the heir to the neoliberal empire, at least in Europe. And now it looks
Yeah.
like he's trying to supplant the United States completely. Which, I mean, granted, we've left him quite the vacuum, at least with our moves so far. But I'm saying it's a long shot. But if anyone can save the neoliberal order in Europe, I say it's Macron. Like I said, he isn't too popular of a president. He's managed to appease his population to enough where we don't really hear much about the Yellow Vests anymore. But again,
Mhm.
we're coming up on winter. We'll see how his policies affect that. We'll see how things go, especially in November, because that's when they broke out last time. Um, but if he can play his cards right, which again it's a long shot, I think he could probably secure France as sort of the defender of neoliberalism in Europe. I mean, if not, the direction I see France going in, not to get off on too much of a tangent, is sort of that Franco-Italian populist alliance, depending on how things go in Italy, which with their current government, an election probably isn't too far off there. So I still see it shifting in the more anti-liberal direction, but considering if it were to stay in the liberal direction, that's most likely the specific path it would take.
Right. And Macron's rhetoric has changed in the last 3 weeks. He has made remarks that literally journalists in the Guardian are upset about with regards to immigration and migrants and so on. So um, he's reformulating his talking
Yeah,
points,
he
and I
again
think this
he's
is
more
all.
practical. He would love nothing more than a multicultural paradise, but he knows that the laws of reality apply, and he can only go so far with that.
Yeah, I'd love that, but I like power. Just like outright power even
Yeah, it's
more.
like, that's cool, but I would prefer not to get overthrown by populists. I think that's pretty much Macron's mindset of the past year.
Exactly. I think that's crystal clear. That I think nails him.
But
He ultimately does not want to be ousted, and ultimately those above him don't want him to be ousted by a populist leader.
oh,
So he'll have
absolutely.
to concede. He'll have to manage this.
But yeah, again, Macron does sort of hearken to Erdogan. I think they're very similar type of leader.
Hmm.
I think they're both a very wild card type of leader. Both very pragmatic. Both know what cards they've been dealt and how they can play them. And again, I grudgingly respect Macron But just to move on, just to close out the show, I want to do one last topic here, and that is some of the recent mess with China. So of course, you have companies, you have organizations as the NBA, sort of uh, being more lenient towards China, sort of brushing the Hong Kong thing under the rug, which I mean, Donald Trump admittedly has done. He's used it as a bargaining chip in trade negotiation, which, just to be clear, I have nothing against. In fact, I think that's about the only thing it's good for. Is if we want to come to a trade deal, use Taiwan, Hong Kong is bargaining chips, wedges as much as we want. Again, maybe we can use it for something in exchange for like Venezuela or their other activities in Latin America. If but yeah, I think again, Trump, despite his hands being tied, is again also more pragmatic in the East Asian sense. We'll see how things go without Bolton, but uh, there's been a lot of things going around on the right about China. Do we support Hong Kong out of principle? Do we support liberty and democracy? Do we support them just to put a thorn inside of China? Do we stand with China because they're anti-liberal? And I think you should tell me what you tell the audience what you're telling me off air.
Yeah, I'm G-pilled. I want them crushed. I literally want those protesters, those cringy ass protesters crushed. I already saw slut walk protesters. I saw a bunch of Western thoughts in amongst these protesters. It's like, no, just end this now. I don't care.
But
I'm not,
what was the one tweet
doing
that you were telling me about?
Oh yeah. So Borzoi said, um, liberalism is so gay that it's made conservative, patriotic right wingers side with China and Xi Jinping. Words to that effect, right? So I replied with my Xi Jinping groiper. I'm Xi pilled right now. Yeah, I mean, and it has done that, and of course and that woman Shoe on Head or whatever, she's all irate about it. Like the fact is that an element of the alt right that took Pepe and was there to trigger the liberals or whatever. These people were always classical liberals. I mean, they're just '90s liberals to me, or early 2000s liberals.
Yeah, I mean, they,
right?
they bitch and moan and complain about the Clintons, but you know damn well if it were '96, they would be having the Clinton Gore signs out in their lawn.
Right, and it never occurs to them that we'd end up, where if we go back to that, we'll end up where we are now, anyways. Right, but they're not willing to do that. They're not willing to think it through in that way. So, of course, there are for these protests in Hong Kong, and the protests are actually more sustained and getting far more violent. I think, we're going to reach a tipping point. I think that is going to happen eventually. Um, Now that's been good for the bargaining and everything, but there's also another delicious irony in all of this, and that is with the NBA fiasco in China. So you have American liberals, and of course it's also the stupid conservative, some of the conservative grifters, and who are all for free speech all of a sudden. These same people who said, both on the left and on the right, well, it's a corporation.
Yeah.
It's a corporation. They can decide. Well, you know what? It's business, so China can decide.
you know,
You know,
I will say
so
this.
you know what? Stuff it. Bend the knee. Bend the knee. Where were they the last 3 years? And now they're upset at this. Why? Because it's on a geopolitical level, and because it's China. Communist China is going to take over the world. All this kind of paranoia, right? Like now that it's like they just identify with losers, Kurds, and Hong Kong protesters. It's so cringe. Like, this is it.
Cantonese
That's what you
soy
identify
liberals.
What's that?
I said, yeah, Cantonese soy liberals.
Yeah. Good grief.
But I will say this in terms of the China Hong Kong thing. I've been pretty admittedly neutral about this. I haven't taken much interest in. Like I said, it's one of the least inspiring protests I've ever seen. And as I said, the Maidan at least had that element of nationalism. They're standing up for their people, their nation. As much as contrived as that was, the Arab Spring, they're standing up against ruthless tyrants who are butchering their people in the street. Again, contrived, but at least there's some inspiring element to that. But what I see here, from my point of view, is liberals versus communists. Like, I could not care less who wins about this. But I will say this: China, I don't view them as like this great power vying for world domination. I could not care less what they're doing in Africa. I could not care less what they're doing in Central Asia. Slightly concerned about Latin America, but nothing I don't think that can be solved through negotiation. Um, Again, same with Europe, and I don't think Europe's going to let itself get overrun by the Chinese. I will say this though: our entanglement into business has gone too far. Funny enough, Pat Buchanan has been calling this out since '92. Of course, the media pivots to some quote unquote anti-Semitic comments he made in the 1970s and 80s. That's aside the point. Number two is Trump actually has made progress on this with his trade negotiations. Their role in drug manufacturing is a bit concerning. Nothing to consider them a major geopolitical rival over, but it's enough to take concern in it. Point being is
Mm-hmm.
the main problems we have with China are economic. Nothing that can't be solved through cutting some ties and making some new deals. And as to that, China, they don't have world ambitions. Most countries don't have world ambitions. I would argue even the United States,
Yeah.
in its most practical form, does not have world ambitions. So, insofar as, okay, yeah, keep a few bases in Asia, keep a few bases in the Philippines and Pacific Islands, put a little heat on China when you have to. But beyond that, I don't view them as that grave of a threat.
Right, right, and the protests are really there to, get it does make some liberals tacitly on the side of Trump with the trade wars that have been taking place for a year now. And Trump is going to take that. I mean, that's just good strategy. Who would have thought that Western ethos and Trump would both agree on on the fate of Hong Kong?
I mean, this is the most consensus we've
Um,
had since the hijab protests in Iran.
yeah, yeah. So exactly, right. Um, the liberals are still going to hate him, but they're going to hate him for different reasons, and they're never going to give him credit for this. But it does lend, all it does is it stops them from having yet another thing to complain about.
Yeah,
So yeah, so this, they'll take the support. But yeah, but as for myself, I mean, this is it's just empowering the worst kind of degeneracy. Like, um, originally, this was about a case of one of these, you know, um, I think he was from mainland China. He killed a girl in Hong Kong, and he was supposed to be extradited. And anyways, I haven't read up on the story in ages, but um, now that's off the table, and you can see that the machinations in Hong Kong, they're much bigger. This is about in some way compromising China. I don't see how Hong Kong is ever going to be returned to the West,
oh no.
but it is a thorn in their side nonetheless. All right, it's not on the level of say what Ukraine means um, to Russia as a kind of a permanent state of conflict and problems, and a wedge issue that can be used against Russia from time to time. Um, so, but it could. The protests do have to stop, and um, the trajectory is that there is eventually going to be violence there in order to stop.
Yeah. I will also say this. I mean, it's funny because like the early days of the protest went from we long for the old colonial days of British rule. Sort of like a lot of like more conservative Christian types were in these protests, but it's been completely overrun by liberals, people who want more
Yeah.
gay rights, sexual liberation, these sort of things. So it's interesting to watch how fastly that's evolved. And I said early on that yeah, of course, CIA is everywhere, but it may be a bit more genuine than some of these other protests, but at this point, what genuinity was there, if it was there in the first place, has been completely compromised and snuffed out.
Right. Yeah, that's right. These protests were on Sundays after church. That's literally how they got started.
Yeah,
And now you
yeah.
have
People
like
holding banners, getting out of the way for
just these
ambulances. Very
degenerate women with
benevolent.
green hair. Yeah, yeah. Um, and you see these videos of young men literally taking metal bars and just smashing up the subway. It's just for me, it like this. It has some similarities with the way Maidan started in 2013. You know, like it took a long time, but eventually the shots were fired.
Oh yeah. Uh, but I will end the show with this. I heard one, I guess you could call it, theory that some of the Brzezinskiites in the deep state are fueling this Hong Kong thing in order to get China to, I guess, quote unquote, fall in line, sort of in the grand strategy against Russia as the more pro Brzezinski and his
Yes.
acolytes would. Now, I can actually see the rationale behind that. Sort of, look, if you let up,
Oh
if you
yeah.
cooperate with us, we can make this Hong Kong thing go away.
Right. That is absolutely how it's working, and this is why like these protesters even adopted Pepe, you know, as a sign of rebellion, and of course that's to get like the alt right, the moderate right wingers in America on board. But the fact is they're not all that interested. There's a few that are interested, with some pretty big accounts, but they're not going to meme it. They're not going to meme it into reality. I think most people on the right, especially those that were sort of unorthodox right. I'm not talking about the neocons or the evangelical right in America. Uh, are they're disillusioned with Trump
Yeah, I mean,
to some extent,
their biggest concern
and
is where's the
they're
wall?
not going to fall for the Pepe posters again. Like it's done.
Yeah, I mean, on our side, like I haven't seen any like outright like, oh, what the hell is going on in Hong Kong? I've just seen a lot of people just not talking about it, just ignoring it. They just really don't care, and that's kind of where I am.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh, but
yeah. I am too. I don't keep. I mean, I read about it from time to time, and I'll watch the videos, but generally not riveted by it. It doesn't occupy my attention the way Syria does.
I mean, there's only two outcomes, none of which are really going to be that monumental. Is Hong Kong stays like a semi-autonomous free city state that's somewhat westernized, or they're going to get incorporated into China proper. Neither of which are again monumental or have some great impact on global politics. It just kind of is.
Yeah. I honestly don't even think they're going to be completely incorporated. I think Beijing sees this for what it is. It's used as a wedge for trade talks bargaining, and that's its purpose. There's no Western country that has been vociferous about anything remotely like Hong Kong being returned to the West, or and some of these protesters, they're absolutely delusional. Like, did you guys see what the story about the Kurds this week?
Do
They're
tell.
not coming in. They're not. They're not going to save you. America's not going to take over Hong Kong and save you.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
But beyond that, I don't have much to say about this week's news. There were some elections in Poland. The right-wing Law and Justice Party did well,
yeah,
especially among the youth. So there's a bit hope there. And again, hopefully, Poland at least understands that it has to play the pendulum game and it has to pivot between East and West if it does not want to be fully consumed. But um, I suppose there's a little bit of white pill to leave you off there that they're
hmm
not completely kiss the neoliberalism, and that they're sort of disillusioned with America after this Kurdish decision. So we'll see where that goes. We'll probably talk more about that next week. But unless you have anything to say, I'm gonna wind the show down.
No, that's it for me.
Excellent. So we'll see everyone next time. Hopefully you enjoy the show. Share it if you like it. Hit that thumbs up. Of course, all my links down in the description. Find all my social media, everything like that. See you guys next time, and goodbye.